Welcome to this deep dive. We sift through the sources so you don't have to.
And today, we're looking at the life and legacy of Pope Francis.
That's right. His recent passing on Easter Monday, April 21st, 2025, has really brought his life into focus globally. We've got a great set of materials here.
We do. Biographical details, news reports on his passing and legacy, information on his actions, his relationships with world leaders. It's quite a range.
So our mission, as always, is to piece together the story from Jorge Bergoglio in Buenos Aires to Pope Francis on the world stage.
Exactly. To understand the key moments and influences.
Okay, so let's dive in. Where better to start than his early life in Argentina?
Right. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, born in Flores, a neighborhood in Buenos Aires, December 17th, 1936.
The eldest of 5 kids.
That's it. His father, Mario Jose Bergoglio, was an accountant, an Italian immigrant from Piedmont. His mother, Regina Maria Severi, was born in Buenos Aires, but her family was also from northern Italy.
So a strong Italian connection there.
Very strong. The family history is interesting, too. His father's family moved within Italy, from Turin to Asti back in 1918. Then Mario, his father, came to Argentina in 1929.
And apparently that move wasn't just about economics.
No, according to Pope Francis's sister, Maria Elena, they left Italy to get away from Mussolini's fascist regime. So, politics was already shaping the family's story.
That definitely adds a layer. Any other siblings we should know about?
Yes, 3 others: Oscar Adrian, Marta Regina, and Alberto Horacio. And we know his niece, Cristina Bergoglio. She's a painter based in Madrid.
There's even mention of a photo of him as a boy.
Yeah, around age 12 at Salesian College. Gives you a little snapshot, doesn't it? Circa 1948, 1949.
Okay, so from those early days, how did his path lead towards the church hierarchy?
Well, jumping forward quite a bit, a key moment was 1992. He was appointed Auxiliary Bishop of Buenos Aires. Auxiliary Bishop, right, assisting the main bishop. Exactly. He was consecrated on June 27th that year. Cardinal Antonio Corricino was the main consecrator, and he became the titular bishop of Ococa, one of those historical dioceses.
And that's when he chose his motto, Miserando atque elegendo. Tell us about that.
Yes. By having mercy and by choosing. It's powerful. Comes from a homily by St. Bede about Jesus calling Matthew the tax collector.
Because he saw him through the eyes of mercy and chose him.
Precisely. It really points to this core belief in God's mercy reaching everyone, even those on the fringes. And that theme, well, it just runs through his entire ministry.
He seems to have risen pretty quickly after that in Buenos Aires.
He did. By 1997, he was appointed coadjutor archbishop.
Meaning he was next in line.
Correct. And when Cardinal Corricino passed away in February 1998, Bergoglio automatically succeeded him as the Archbishop of Buenos Aires.
And as Archbishop, what were his priorities? The sources mention quite a few things.
Yeah, he was active, establishing new parishes, restructuring things administratively, leading pro-life efforts, setting up a commission on divorces.
But the work in the shanty towns, the villas misera, that really stands out.
Oh, absolutely. That was huge. He didn't just talk about the poor. He went there. He significantly increased the church's presence, actually doubled the number of priests working in the villas.
Doubled them.
Yes. And he visited frequently himself, really listened to people. That's how he got that nickname, the Viero Bishop, the slum bishop. You can really see the foundation being laid there for his later focus as pope.
Now, we also have to touch upon a more difficult period mentioned in the sources, the accusations relating to Argentina's dirty war.
Yes, that's a complex and sensitive part of his story. Accusations did surface, particularly from 2 Jesuit priests, Fathers Yorio and Jalix, who were kidnapped during that time.
They initially felt he hadn't done enough.
That was their feeling, yes. Father Yorio, who later passed away, even claimed Bergoglio had essentially handed them over to the death squads. It was a very serious accusation.
But Father Jalix later revised his view, didn't he?
He did, and that's crucial context. Years later, Father Jalix clarified things. He said their capture was actually triggered by a former lay colleague who had joined the guerrillas and implicated them under interrogation.
So not Bergoglio's doing?
Jalix explicitly stated it was wrong to assert Bergoglio had denounced them or initiated their capture. So his later testimony really counters the earlier narrative.
Are there other perspectives on his role during that time?
Yes, the sources offer a few.
Yeah.
Someone named Oliveira described Bergoglio then as anguished and very critical of the dictatorship, but feeling like he couldn't speak out too much.
Understandable, given the danger.
Exactly. And Adolfo Pérez Esquivel, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, stated Bergoglio never collaborated with the dictatorship, though maybe lacked the public courage of some others.
And human rights groups.
Graciela Fernandez Mejide from the Permanent Assembly for Human Rights said her investigations found no proof linking him to the regime. So it's a picture with different shades, reflecting a very difficult, repressive time.
Okay, moving to his relationships with Argentine presidents later on. Sounds like things weren't always easy.
That's putting it mildly, perhaps. With President de la Rua during the economic crisis, the church under Bergoglio was critical of austerity measures. There was talk of a meeting to foster dialogue, but it apparently fell through.
But the real tension seems to have been with the Kirchners, Nestor, and Christina.
Yes, that relationship was notably tense. There's an incident in 2004, a mass attended by President Nestor Kirchner, where Bergoglio spoke out against exhibitionism and strident announcements and called for real political dialogue.
A pretty direct comment.
Seen as very direct, yes. Then in 2006, Bergoglio supported a bishop, Joaquin Pina, in Misiones province. Pina won an election that stopped a constitutional change Kirchner wanted, one that would have allowed indefinite re-elections for the governor.
So a political defeat for Kirchner linked back to Bergoglio.
That's how it was widely interpreted. And the tension continued with Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner after she became president. Big disagreements during the agricultural strikes in 2008, and especially over the push to legalize same-sex marriage.
Fascinating how that dynamic seemed to change completely once he became pope.
It really did. Initially, back in Argentina, his election was met with some mixed reactions. Some media, like Pagina 12, even reran those dirty war allegations. The head of the National Library floated a kind of conspiracy theory.
But President Kirchner shifted her stance.
Massively. The sources call it a Copernican shift. Pope Francis was incredibly popular in Argentina, so politically it made sense for her to embrace him. They had a private meeting, lunch, just before his inauguration.
And the critical newspaper.
Pagina 12. Apparently, after that meeting and the shift in tone, those controversial articles about his past disappeared from their website. Quite the turnaround.
Let's shift focus now to a major global challenge during his papacy, the clergy sexual abuse crisis. How did he handle that, according to the sources?
It was, and remained, a huge issue. One instance that drew early criticism was in 2015 regarding Chilean Bishop Juan Barros, who was accused of covering up abuse by another priest. Francis initially defended Barros.
But he changed his position.
Yes, significantly. In 2018, he admitted he'd made grave errors in judgment. He apologized directly to victims, met with them, and ordered a full Vatican investigation into the Chilean church.
Which led to resignations.
It did. Eventually, Barros and 2 other Chilean bishops resigned. It showed a willingness to acknowledge mistakes and take action, though critics felt it took too long.
Then there was the Theodore McCarrick case in the U.S.
A very prominent case. McCarrick, a former cardinal and Archbishop of Washington, was ultimately removed from the priesthood, defrocked in 2019. The Vatican found the accusations of sexual abuse of minors and adults credible.
And the Vatican investigated how he rose through the ranks.
Yes, a detailed report came out later. It faulted Pope John Paul II's vetting process when appointing McCarrick, and noted that Pope Benedict XVI had put some informal restrictions on McCarrick, but they weren't really enforced.
What did the report say about Francis's knowledge before McCarrick's fall?
It concluded that before 2017, Pope Francis had only heard rumors about McCarrick's alleged misconduct with adults, dating from before his Washington appointment, and these weren't substantiated at the time.
What about the case of Marco Rupnik, the artist-priest? That seems more recent and complex.
Very much so. Father Rupnik faced serious accusations of psychological and sexual abuse over decades. The case was initially declined for prosecution by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith due to the statute of limitations.
But he was expelled from the Jesuits.
Yes, but for disobedience related to the investigation, not directly for the abuse itself. There was significant public outcry, especially as his mosaic still adorned many Vatican spaces, even the Pope's residence.
And Francis intervened later.
He did. Facing pressure, Pope Francis waived the statute of limitations and ordered the Dicastery to reopen the case. In January 2025, Cardinal Fernandez confirmed an independent tribunal was being set up. But the handling of the case drew a lot of criticism for perceived delays and inconsistencies.
Beyond specific cases, what broader steps did he take?
Several important ones. His visit to Ireland in 2018 included a strong apology for the Church's failings there regarding abuse.
Right.
And critically, in 2019, he abolished the use of pontifical secrecy, that rule of confidentiality in clergy sex abuse cases.
That seems significant for transparency.
It was meant to be. The goal was to protect victims, make reporting easier, and cooperate better with civil authorities. He also, in 2021, publicly thanked journalists for their role in uncovering scandals, acknowledging their importance.
Let's turn to international policy. He was certainly active on the global stage.
No question, he engaged with a huge range of issues. Some conservatives felt he had a soft spot for leftist populism, citing things like his Cuba visit. Yale historian Carlos Ayer was critical after that trip.
But he also criticized right-wing populism.
Yes, he did. There was a noticeable contrast drawn between him and someone like Donald Trump, especially from 2016 onwards. Their public disagreement during the U.S. election about building walls versus bridges really highlighted differing worldviews.
And his appearance at the G7 summit in June 2024, that was unprecedented.
Truly historic, the first pope ever to attend. He spoke about the dangers of war, mentioning Ukraine and Gaza, specifically the risks of AI for jobs and ethical concerns around reproductive practices, though apparently without using the word abortion directly.
The sources also mention his calls to Gaza.
Yes, a touching detail. During the Israel-Hamas war, he apparently made regular phone calls to the lone Catholic parish in Gaza, just offering support and blessings, a very personal gesture.
What about the Vatican's relationship with China? That's been a key diplomatic effort.
A very delicate one. The provisional agreement on appointing bishops, first signed in 2018 and renewed since, including October 2024, was aimed at unifying the church in China.
But it's controversial.
Highly controversial. Critics, like Cardinal Zen of Hong Kong, worry it compromises the church and doesn't do enough to protect Catholics facing persecution. The Vatican itself has noted instances where China seemed to violate the pact, but they've kept the dialogue going.
His stance on the Russia-Ukraine war also generated discussion.
It did. He made that symbolic visit to the Russian embassy right at the start. He consistently called for peace. But some comments, like one suggesting the war was perhaps somehow provoked, drew sharp criticism.
People felt he wasn't condemning Russia strongly enough.
Some did. While he supported Ukraine's right to self-defense and condemned atrocities, he resisted, let's say, framing it purely as the West versus Russia. Some saw his efforts at mediation as not yielding clear results, leading to frustration.
He wasn't afraid to engage with conflict zones, though. Iraq, for example.
Definitely. He endorsed using force against ISIS there, back in 2014 when the situation was dire for minorities. And his visit to Iraq in 2021 was historic.
Meeting Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani.
Exactly. A powerful moment of interreligious dialogue denouncing violence in God's name. That outreach to the Muslim world was a major theme.
Like the document on human fraternity signed in 2019?
Yes, with the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar in Abu Dhabi, a landmark document. And visits like the one to a mosque in Indonesia in September 2024 reinforced that commitment.
He also addressed the UN multiple times.
Addressed the General Assembly in 2015 and made joint calls for peace, like one with an imam just before a Security Council vote in 2023. He consistently used these platforms to push for multilateralism and peace.
One more diplomatic point, Catalonia.
Right. In 2017, the Vatican reaffirmed its long-standing position of not recognizing secessionist movements in reference to the Catalan independence push. Standard Vatican policy, really.
So, looking broadly, he's often seen as both a reformer and a figure of controversy. How did those play out?
Well, his outreach was key. Reaching out to migrants, the poor, the LGBTQ+ community, many saw this as deeply pastoral and reformist, even if doctrine didn't change.
But that generated pushback.
Significant pushback from conservative Catholics. They disliked what they saw as a progressive bent. His changes, like condemning the death penalty, absolutely were reforms. But he held the line on abortion.
And the restrictions on the old Latin Mass.
That caused huge friction. Traditionalists felt targeted. His document Amoris Laetitia on the family also sparked debate, with some critics even accusing him of heresy over interpretations regarding communion for the divorced and remarried.
And more recently, fiducia supplicans.
Yes, the declaration allowing for blessings for couples in irregular situations, including same-sex couples. While framed as non-liturgical blessings of people, not unions, it caused a major backlash.
Particularly from Africa.
Yes, many African bishops' conferences issued strong statements opposing its implementation, highlighting the deep divisions within the church on these pastoral approaches. It really underscored the tightrope he often walked.
Which brings us, sadly, to his final days. He passed away on April 21st, 2025.
Yes, Easter Monday. He was 88. The official cause was a stroke leading to irreversible cardiocirculatory collapse. He'd been frail for some time, dealing with chronic lung issues, pneumonia. His public appearances had become less frequent.
His last appearance was Easter Sunday.
Just the day before. He gave his Urbi et Orbi blessing and notably called again for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, still focused on peace right until the end.
And his death, of course, triggers the process for electing a successor.
That's right. The procedures are now underway. The cardinals will gather for the conclave in the Sistine Chapel to choose the next pope.
So reflecting on his papacy, what are the main threads of his legacy according to these sources?
Well, first, being the first Latin American pope. That's huge, historically. Then his style often described as humble, charming, less formal, breaking down some of the Vatican's traditional stiffness.
And his focus on the poor.
Absolutely central. A deep, consistent concern for the poor, the marginalized migrants. That Valero bishop identity carried through his whole papacy.
But not without friction.
Definitely not. While many were charmed, his critiques of capitalism, his focus on climate change, his outreach on LGBTQ+ issues, the liturgical changes all but alienated some conservatives, both inside and outside the church.
The global tributes seem to reflect that broad impact.
They really do. You have the UN Secretary General calling him a messenger of hope, humility, and humanity. Nigeria's President Tinubu mourning a steadfast advocate for the developing world who challenged the powerful,
President Biden called him the People's Pope.
and awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom just months before his death. Even in Argentina, despite the complex relationship over the years, his death prompted widespread reflection. That story about him calling the church in Gaza regularly, it speaks volumes about his personal touch.
It really paints a picture of a multifaceted figure, a complex legacy, certainly.
No doubt. Reformer, traditionalist in some ways, diplomat, pastor, a figure who comforted many and challenged many others.
So as a final thought for our listeners, considering all this outreach, the controversies, the global engagement, what might be the most enduring part of Pope Francis's legacy?
That's the big question, isn't it? Maybe it's that relentless focus on Mercy Miserando, seeing the world and the church through that lens. His insistence that the church must go out to the peripheries, meet people where they are, messy lives and all. That emphasis on a field hospital church rather than a fortress. That might be what shapes discussions for years to come.
A field hospital church, a powerful image to end on. Thank you for unpacking all of that with us.
My pleasure.
And thank you all for joining this deep dive. We hope it's given you plenty to think about regarding the life and impact of Pope Francis. We encourage you to keep exploring, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.